Going off a lot of the news you may have heard over the past year, Halo Infinite isn't looking pretty. It definitely seems to be in an unsightly state. It looks like the kind of game that you reluctantly take home from the store, but only if it's the end of the night and you're 15 beers down. That July demo was the kind of footage to make babies cry. Now, I know it sounds like I'm being tough on the game. Yes, I am being a bit hyperbolic, but we really should expect better. It's been 5 years since 343's last game, and this is all they come up with. Yes, there are some good aspects about it. An open world game could be cool for sure, but the reaction was mixed, leaning mostly towards the negative, I'd say. Halo Infinite was meant to be a launch title for the Xbox Series X. We really got a proper taste of the next-gen smart delivery ray-traced experience, didn't we? Beyond this, it was coming off a decade of relative mediocrity. The few brilliant moments of 343's decade with Halo, such as Halo 5's Forge, are overshadowed by all of the downsides, and boy are there downsides. But before we get to that, let's start from the beginning. 343 Industries as a whole is older than you may think. They were founded by Microsoft in 2007 after Bungie gained its independence. Of course, Bungie still had to make 2 more games as a part of their contract. In its early years, 343 handled community aspects of the game. Their early work includes the creation of the Halo Legends anime and the development of the Halo Waypoint app. Around the same time, they started hiring more people, preparing for full-time game development. Among the people they hired were about 20 people from Pandemic Studios, who were responsible for Star Wars Battlefront. There were actually other Halo-adjacent studios formed earlier than 343 Industries, such as Certain Affinity. Certain Affinity was founded by ex-Bungie multiplayer lead Max Hoberman. Certain Affinity also worked on Halo 4 and Halo 2 Anniversary. They are also helping with the development of Halo Infinite. Certain Affinity is also notable for developing the multiplayer for Doom 2016. 343 officially took full control of the Halo brand in early 2012, just a few months before Halo 4's released. Halo 4 was being developed while Bungie was still transitioning away from Halo. It was before they'd completely split. Of course, most of Bungie didn't transition away from Halo at all, right? Most of Bungie moved to 343 Industries so they could keep working on Halo. At least, that's what Redditors told me. And I really want it to be true. What truth is there to this legend, however? Well, as it turns out, not much. Only about 2 people left Bungie to keep working on Halo, and Frank O'Connor is basically the only one who stayed on for an extended period of time. There was Max Hoberman and Certain Affinity who stayed close on the sidelines, but they still had some freedom to do their own thing. No, as it turns out, this was a persistent myth that occurred around the aftermath of Halo 4. People were dazed and confused. What just happened? Why does this Call of Duty game look like Halo? It was a cataclysm, really. Out of this confusion, the myth of the Great Transition was born. It was clearly just something people thought up at the time, and other people believed it with little research. But somehow, it's been extremely persistent. Think about that for a moment. Imagine you're working on one project for a whole decade. As a creative mind, you have to remain consistent to the same universe and its ever-increasing number of rules. You have to maintain a consistent art style and design all throughout the game. No wonder Reach deviated in game design. People say that Reach began the trend of moving Halo into some advanced movement game and began the downfall. But Halo Reach and Halo 4 are not comparable in this respect. Halo Reach was a studio that had just been working on the game series for a decade. Halo 4 was a brand new studio, not burnt out, that was trying to cut its teeth on its first ever game. No, most people from Bungie followed their studio, where most of their peers worked, onto their new project, and the new horizons that entailed. Look at their final vidoc. It's full of hope for what's to come for the studio. Keep in mind, this was around the 2011 to 2012 point, still a few years before the major rifts in the studio that saw many people, such as Marty and Joe Staten, leave for good. You're already established within a company. You've been through so many major projects together over the years. Are you going to leave that behind just so you can work on a game that you've already been working on for a decade, and that, to be honest, many people were sick of? Of course not. That's because that doesn't happen. Most of Bungie stayed with the company when they moved on from Microsoft. 343 was a brand new studio. Halo 4 was made mostly with people who never worked on a Halo game before, and boy did it show. The art and the game design was such a departure. They blatantly chased market trends with the Call of Duty style multiplayer. They didn't know what a Halo game was meant to be. It subsequently tanked in sales. Now, that's not entirely true. Halo 4 sold quite well, but the player base tanked. And then Halo 5, while still selling very well, sold much fewer than any of the previous mainline Halo games. Halo 5 was somewhat of an improvement in terms of the gameplay. But the campaign? Well, you gotta wonder if there's even any mattress left. It shit the bed that badly. There were even starts. The laser tag multiplayer was certainly fun at times. The Forge was brilliant. They were listening to fans, but they were still clearly lacking any of the specific knowledge from people who worked on building the original series. They didn't have the foundational experience or knowledge of how to specifically design a Halo game. There are people within Bungie who refer to Halo as Marathon 4. It's kind of the continuation of the studio's expertise and experience in first-person shooters.
When the other games came out, clearly they didn't quite hit the same, level of polish and goodness. But part of that is because Halo is really like Marathon 5 in a lot of ways. And I realize this is going to be, absolutely kind of incendiary to long-time Bungie fans or whatever. But I think it's really important for everyone to realize that Bungie had worked together on a lot of titles. We knew what each other were capable of.
Remember the quote, "We hired people who hated Halo." The less than stellar reception of Halo 4 and 5 definitely affected things behind the scenes. 343 has been in a significant state of flux. Remember those Glassdoor reviews that told of an embattled 343 Industries? It's always important to take these things with a grain of salt. Typically, Glassdoor reviews are biased in favor of disgruntled employees. Someone who's happy with their job typically doesn't write up reviews online, but those reviews that we saw are consistent with what we've seen from 343 Industries. 343 lost Tim Longo as creative director and Mary Olsen as producer in 2019, and Chris Lee as creative director this year. Not to mention the unfinished state of the gameplay demo earlier in the year. It looked unfinished, and several sources corroborate this notion. There was one source a while ago who said that it was apparently not even running on an Xbox, but a PC, that they changed visions and rebooted the game several times throughout development. It was originally meant to cover an entire Halo ring and be fully open world, but they had to continually keep scaling it down. Not to mention it was delayed. It was meant to be out by now, and it wasn't just delayed by a few months, but basically a whole year. Of course, Parasite has some involvement in this, but there's clearly more than that happening at 343 Industries. There's still a hint of that lack of direction that characterized their previous releases. Halo Infinite seems to take some Fortnite visual cues, with its opaque grenade effects, its flat colours, and its ever so slightly more cartoonish proportions. It's not so much that they're cloning Fortnite, but rather that they are sanitizing Halo for a broader audience, in the Fortnite style. I think one of the most important statements people need to remember following the departure of Tim Longo was as follows. The overall creative vision and production of the game remains led by Chris Lee. Well, that aged like milk in the middle of the Sahara. Some people thought the delay was only going to be a few months. The game only needed a bit more polish. Some people are delusional. It's no surprise that the game was delayed until autumn of next year, which is actually spring, meaning it's towards the end of the year, and they took Joe Staten on as creative lead. Do you seriously think they're going to take someone on in a role that senior just before they're ready to launch? No! They're rebuilding the game. It may have been virtually content complete, but I assure you it's in a very rough state. The departure of Chris Lee was not a mistake either. He didn't just decide on a whim. He was pushed out by Microsoft and 343 management. He was effectively replaced by Joe Staten. This is something that happens in industry. It's a very bad sign to have being fired exist on your record. It reflects very poorly on you. They tend to give people in these high positions the opportunity to leave on their own right. They kind of push them out. The creative director effectively leads the direction of the game from a very high level. They have a finger in every pie. 343 has changed creative director twice now in the development of this game. That should be setting off alarm bells if it hasn't already. There has been a structural problem at 343. It's been there for years now. The response to the July Halo Infinite demo was the straw that broke the camel's back. 343 was in a mad scramble to fix their game, patch it up, but no band-aid can cover a flesh wound. 343 needed to amend their priorities, they needed to reorder, and they did. There's a completely new creative head, leading the game through a whole other year of development. They're not remaking the game from the beginning. That's obviously not going to happen in a year, but they're changing it significantly. The core gameplay and a lot of the content will be the same, but the game will definitely be a far cry in many ways from what we saw. Remember when Aaron Greenberg from Xbox went so far as to say the game was going to be a visual powerhouse? Mind you, this was at the Craig the Brute period. It seemed an almost absurd statement, but as hard as I've been towards 343, we need to rethink this. It's not necessarily that Halo Infinite is ugly, it's that it's unfinished, it's raw and unpolished. While the visual design, the art style for Halo 4 and 5 were not the best, they were still technically competent. Halo 4 had quality lighting and managed to pack a surprising amount of visual detail and fidelity into an Xbox 360 game. Halo Infinite looked bad from a technical standpoint, but I don't think it's fair to judge its visuals at this point. I think they're going to put in the work, the extra year it takes to get this right, visually at least. This is 343's last chance, and they know it. They know that their management is on thin ice. They have to get it right, or they're on the chopping block. They can't have another showing like the Craig demo. After this demo debacle, they decide to do us dirty, doubly so. And I mean raw, no lube. Of course, what I'm referring to is the armor coding situation. Basically, rather than letting players pick their own primary and secondary colors, like in every other previous game, they have to choose from pre-made armor coatings. These armor coatings are locked behind Halo Infinite's microtransaction system, although some of them can be earned. There was a Monster Energy promotion which stated that associated armor coatings were valued at approximately $5. $5 US. That's just absurd. Not even Destiny locks its shaders behind paywalls of that size. It goes without saying at this stage that we don't entirely know how this system works. To be honest, 343 probably doesn't have a complete idea either, which is why it's important our voice be heard right now. Remember that Halo Infinite multiplayer will be free to play, releasing alongside the paid portion of the game, that being the campaign. They need to provide at least the same level of customization for full paying customers as previous Halo games had. This system is really only acceptable if they only expand our existing options, rather than take away things we had and put them behind paywalls. I'll put the coding situation this way. There are a few ways they could pull it off without screwing us over, but there are a hell of a lot of ways they could completely screw it up. There has, however, recently been a tiny glimmer of hope. Following the July demo, 343 went into full content drought mode. Head down, no talking, whoever talks gets the bullet. Until recently. They finally came out with a press release and, well, I very clearly had no qualms being critical of 343, but my god. When I first saw this, I'll be honest, I thought it was concept art at first. But no, it's real, it's in-game footage. This looks amazing. They're giving the game a complete technical and graphical overhaul. I knew something like this would happen. They were humiliated earlier in the year and needed to come back strong if they had all hoped to redeem themselves. And boy does this strike back at so much of the negative buzz surrounding the game. It's just a little glimmer of hope for us Halo fans. It almost seems as if they're correcting course. They're setting the ship on the right path. They're righting their wrongs. They got the feedback from the demo, they got the extra year, they got Joe, and they're finally undoing their mistakes. Of course, it's important not to get ahead of ourselves. This is a tiny selective screenshot that doesn't represent the whole game, but it does show off the image they're going for. It almost feels as if some real passion went into this. They want to redeem themselves, not just to the general public, but to Halo fans. Joe Staten said he played through the campaign twice when he came onto the game and claims to have been blown away. He says that this is the game they wanted to make all the way back in 2001. Exceptionally high praise. Obviously, take it with a grain of salt. In fact, dry out the entire Dead Sea and just drop all that salt on this little bit of news. It's his own game now. His own team. He has to sell it. Remember, Joe Staten was the trump card. He was the last-ditch effort by 343. Make no mistake, Joe Staten isn't there just to polish. He's there to make changes. He's there to go
to war.
My advice, as always, is to wait and see. Don't jump into defending or endlessly trashing this game we've barely seen much of. Some of the things they've shown seem pretty good. Plenty of what they've shown seems crap as well. It's just too early to make a decision. I know you probably want some scathing takedown, but moderation is key. 343 have let us down many times in the past. They've shown some genuine capacity to learn from their past errors and make things work in the future. Some of these armor renders do look quite good. They're clearly going to be bringing back a lot of the old armor. This George armor looks pretty good, for example. What's surprising is the original armor sets. They look good and fairly consistent with the style of previous Halos. They've also confirmed that Halo Monkey is going to be getting a makeover, so it's goodbye to Craig and hello to the new brutes. The facial animations were incomplete, contributing to the lifeless look of the brutes. They're bringing back brute hair as well. All of the brutes in the demo were strangely hairless. They've addressed many of the other graphical complaints like the popping in the distance. Can they make this work? They haven't exactly instilled confidence, but the situation isn't as dire as it once was. Hey, at least the Forge will probably be good. At the end of the day, 343 is a business. They're trying to make money. They're not appealing to all of us old Halo fans, just out of the goodness of their hearts. They ultimately all have their own financial responsibilities, and they want to see their product succeed. But that's not to say they don't have some passionate people on the team who really love Halo. But ultimately, I think the top brass at 343 has been responsible for a lot of the failures, and basically, their head is on the chopping block at Microsoft. They're still the flagship. It was Halo that was advertised with the Xbox Series X, so they need to watch out. They basically have to nail this, or else. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm aiming for 1,000 subscribers right now, so please consider subscribing and enabling notifications as well, because quite often, when you subscribe to people, it won't even show up in your notifications at all. Thank you all so much for watching, and goodbye.
What if the phones rang?
Kills the Master Chief.